Alright, officially the next day. Now, it is obviously not raining as was initially planned in the forecast for today. I at least want to get all those drawers pre-drilled and ready for assembly. There might be a little more sanding after we do all the pre-drilling. So I'm going to start with that, get everything set up, and then we can get going.
Welcome back to the build series. Today's big goal is to get the drawers prepped so that we can get them assembled. We're going to pre-drill a bunch of dowel holes and some holes for some screws on the front face that'll attach the outside 2x8, and then we'll get everything sanded as well for a final time. And if you're trying to do this build sequentially and you're doing the staged approach to the build, it might make more sense for you to stain everything before starting to assemble these drawers. The reason I'm doing these out of order is, like I said, it wasn't supposed to be sunny weather on this day, and it had rained the day before, so I was worried that the wood might have picked up too much moisture and that the stain wouldn't have come out well if I did it on this day. With that said, feel free to jump forward in the series if you'd rather do that part first. It really doesn't matter, but in the meantime, let's go into the details for this. To begin with, we're pre-drilling the holes for the dowel pins in the four corners of our drawer. Now, I'm using dowel pins to hold the corners together for two reasons. First is something like a dovetail is a lot more complex, and I was trying to make this a more beginner-oriented project. And second is that the dowel pins are going to be strong enough, especially with the right amount of wood glue, but I also like the look that it gives having the exposed end of the dowel pin on one side of the drawer. By all means, you can just use a screw here, but again, it's not the aesthetic that I was going for with this project, and maybe it was a little bit more complicated, but for how I personally wanted this bed set to look, the dowel pins for me were the right call aesthetically. Jumping forward really quickly, this is how the dowel pins are going to align. They're going to go through this long board that's going to make the front and the back of this drawer, and then they're going to go into the end of those two side pieces. So they're only going to be visible on the back side of the drawer, so realistically you're not really going to see them that much anyhow. But the first thing I did was mark where all of these holes would be. But I believe the dimensions I used were 1 inch down, 2.5 inches down, and 4 inches down from the top of the drawer. And as for depth, the 1x6 boards are realistically 3/4 of an inch wide. So to make it centered on the board, the center of the hole that we drill is going to be 3/8 of an inch in from the edge of the board. Now, I've said repeatedly in prior episodes that at this point you should have paired all four boards that are going to make up the four sides of each drawer. And the technique I'll show for making these dowel holes, this is going to be even more critical because once these dowel holes are drilled, that is going to be the permanent orientation of these drawers. There is no rearranging them after these holes are drilled. With all that in mind and with all the measurements made, we are ready to start drilling these holes. So before I even do that, I wrap everything with masking tape to try to prevent chip outs as much as possible. Even though you're not going to see the hole itself and that'll be covered by the edge of the other board, the reality is if you get a chip out, that can easily extend past where the board ends. So that could be visible in the final product. So the masking tape or painter's tape, if you don't have masking tape, that'll just help prevent any of these chip outs or any of the splintering to help give you that better finished product that you're looking for. You also might want to put down the tape first and then mark over the top of the tape. That's easier for some people. For me, I could see my marks through the tape, so it wasn't as big of a deal. But once you've pre-drilled the dowel hole on those front and back faces, that is those longer boards, the only way that I could think of to ensure that you get absolutely perfect alignment is to line up the sideboard exactly how you want it to line up in the end product. So I'm using the corner clamps here. I took a lot of time and a lot of effort to make sure that it was perfectly squared from the top to the bottom. I clamped everything in place to make sure that it wasn't going to move, and then I marked the depth that I wanted on my drill. I created a flag on my drill bit by wrapping tape around it, and then that way I knew when the tape hit the surface of the wood, I shouldn't drill any deeper. So that way I wouldn't make these holes deeper than I needed to. And then with everything squared off, clamped in place, not going to move, I put the drill bit through those holes that we already pre-drilled on the front and rear facing boards, and then I went directly from that into those sideboards. And the reason is, if you just transfer the jig over directly to those sideboards, there's a chance that you might be too high, too low, or too far to the left and the right, and as a result of that, your sideboards are not going to be perfectly square because it's going to be centered on where the dowel hole is. By doing it this way, by having everything lined up, then drilling directly through one to get into the other, you're ensuring that both of the holes have to be lined up. That drill bit cannot possibly flex enough to make this thing misaligned later. If anything, it's just going to bore out the hole a little bit more, but not so much that it doesn't fit well. But either way, it'll still ensure that the dowel pins line up perfectly and still gives you the exact fitment that you want in the end. Once again, this is a case that however much time you spend dry fitting this will directly impact the fit and finish on your final product. So again, make sure you get it right here. With that in mind, it is difficult to drill all 3 holes with a single clamp in place. So what I had to do was drill 2, put a new clamp on, remove my original clamp, and then drill the 3rd hole. Just something to keep in mind. It helps to have an extra clamp on hand. But once you put the dowel holes in place for all the boards on all of the drawers, now we're going to pre-drill only the front facing board on each drawer so that we can attach the outward facing 2x8 at the end of this project. Again, I am really overbuilding this here. I know that. I put 8 holes, which means we're going to use 8 screws to attach this board on the drawer to that front face later on. And those holes are 2 inches in and 10 inches in from each side, and they are 1 inch and 3.5 inches down on center. Again, that's probably overkill, but this thing has held up amazingly so far. But if you wanted, you could probably go down to 4 or 6 screws. But if you're going through the effort to make this on your own, you might as well build it well enough to last and spend the money on those extra 4 screws. Just using a smaller drill bit here too. It doesn't have to be anything huge. I think this was a 1/8 or a 3/16 inch. And because you are going to be able to see these in the final product, I drilled from the inside of the drawer outwards because that's the side we'll be able to see at the end. But if you're worried about seeing the pencil marks and stuff and you're worried about not being able to sand them out, put masking tape in the approximate location, mark it over the masking tape, then drill it through the masking tape, and that should prevent chip out as well. Now, before I even drilled, I also used a hammer and a punch just to make a small indent into these. That also prevents the drill bit from walking out and going into the wrong location. But after you've repeated that for all 4 drawer faces, you are ready to move on to the next step. And the next step is doing more sanding. I really shouldn't be a surprise at this point. Once again, a 180 to a 220 grit, and all we're really doing here is cleaning up any edges on the holes that we drilled today. So it'll be those 8 holes that we pre-drilled on the front face. We're going to have to hit those on both sides of the board. And then on all 4 corners of each board, you want to sand down the dowel holes. And again, that means both sides of the board for each hole if applicable. What we're really looking to do here is remove any burrs and any splinters and stuff, but that's also going to help prevent any chip outs in the future by getting rid of them now, and that'll help prevent this thing from degrading over time when it's actually in use. While we're at it, the plywood that we're using for the drawer bottoms, I noticed a couple of the edges were either dirty or they were rough or a little bit splintery, so I did a quick pass on those edges as well while I had everything set up and outside. But with that said, I was realizing that I was very quickly running out of daylight. Now on paper, it might not seem like we did a lot today, but in practice, we really did accomplish a lot because getting this alignment perfect now is so critical to the end product. But now that all the drawer prep is done, I think this is a good place to close this one out. So in the next episode, we'll start doing some of the final staining and finishing, but that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. It was going to look better for the type of product I was trying to make. Jesus. This is what I try to record through.